You are watching Canadian Muslim News on Muslim Network TV from Toronto, Ontario. I'm Catherine Bullock. Assalamu alaikum and greetings of peace. What is it like for Afghan women trying to adjust to life in Canada? You'll find out later in the show. We will talk to Abrar Mechmechia and Shabnam Mahboobi about a program they're running called Dil Bal Dil, which means heart to heart. But first, some news headlines. Different groups in Canada distrust the RCMP. Rohingya Centre of Canada receives $125,000 grant. Reviving the Islamic Spirit Conference highlights human rights issues. Rohingya refugees get emergency treatment in Indonesia. And now the details. Canadian Muslims have expressed their frustration over the lack of appropriate response from the RCMP for the targeting faced by Muslim-led charities. Recently, the RCMP determined that the Muslim Association of Canada, the largest Muslim charity, had been receiving fake documents, allegedly from the RCMP and CRA. The documents implied that the authorities were trying to entrap the Muslim organization. The news comes after a mass shooting inquiry in April this year in Nova Scotia found deep public distrust in the National Police Force. Earlier this year, an Indigenous group in Newfoundland and Labrador demanded that the government form a committee to examine systemic racism in the Mounties. The region of Waterloo, Ontario, has granted approximately $125,000 to the Rohingya Centre of Canada in Kitchener. The Rohingya Centre of Canada was founded in downtown Kitchener in March 2022. The centre in April will have a one-year celebration. It serves 600 of the approximately 1,000 Rohingya in Canada. The money will cover rent, staff, training, and mental health workshops. The grant is part of a $4 million stream Waterloo Region is giving to programs focused on enhancing the well-being and health of minorities and other communities experiencing racism.
I am here representing Justice for All Canada. We are a non-profit and non-partisan human rights and advocacy organization. We're here at the Reviving the Islamic Conference at the Metro Toronto Convention Centre.
Justice for All Canada, a non-profit genocide prevention organization, has had a busy weekend raising awareness at the Reviving the Islamic Spirit Conference in Toronto, Ontario. Attendees were given a chance to take action on behalf of Uyghur asylum seekers fleeing genocide in China and East Turkestan. The team promoted Motion 62, a refugee bill sponsored by MP Samir Zuberi that seeks to bring to Canada 10,000 Uyghurs. Volunteers asked passers-by to call their MP to support and implement Motion 62. The team also drew attention to the human rights of other persecuted Muslim minorities, including Palestinians, Kashmiris, Rohingyas, Uyghurs, Indians, and Sri Lankans. Rohingya refugees have been receiving emergency medical treatment after a boat carrying nearly 200 people came ashore Monday in Aceh, Indonesia. Indonesian authorities say this is the fourth such landing in the country in recent months. According to a UN agency, at least 26 of these refugees have died in dire conditions during a month at open sea. Each year, thousands of the mostly Muslim Rohingya, heavily persecuted in Buddhist-majority Myanmar, embark on expensive sea journeys in an attempt to reach Malaysia or Indonesia. These vessels are of poor quality, posing a risk to their lives. According to a health worker, some were suffering from severe dehydration, some children were vomiting. And that's it for the news. A lot of immigrants coming to Canada are arriving from war-torn countries. This means they arrive with multiple traumas, not only from war, but also the displacement and migrant adjustment experience. Our next guest, Abrar Mechmechia, CEO and founder of Abrar Trauma and Mental Health Services, and Shabnam Mahboobi, project lead of something called Dil Bal Dil, are here to join us now. They will talk to us about their project and their work. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the show.
Walaikum salam, Kathy. Thank you so much for having us today.
Our pleasure.
Walaikum salam, Kathy.
Shabnam. Let's start with you, Abrar, CEO and founder of an organization in your name, I'm gathering, Mental Trauma and Mental Health Services. It's your brochure says that you aim to help people heal from trauma. And there's a phrase that I hear a lot these days that says trauma-informed care. So can you tell us what it means, trauma-informed care?
Thank you so much for your question. Actually, yes, this organization means a lot personally to me, since it started from me personally experiencing the trauma in Syria. And when we talk about trauma-informed term, which is recently being used a lot among the mental health sector, we mean that when we work with humans, we work with the lens of understanding of their symptom and the trauma that come with that symptoms and that signs and that behavior that they show. So it's understanding the trauma and working through the trauma lens toward the healing. So it's not dealing with the people as just if they have just disorder or, for example, just anxiety or just depression. No, putting the trauma alongside of any symptoms or they're showing or signs that they're showing.
Mm-hmm. So can we make that a practical example? I arrive, I'm showing, I don't know, let's say depression. What would the trauma-informed care difference be as distinct with someone who's arriving from a non-trauma background with depression?
So if you were working with non-trauma informed lens, you would focus on the depression, on the suicidal ideation, and start working and breaking that down. For example, follow lots of methods like CBT and etc. with kind of dismissing the huge and complex trauma that they come with, and probably But when you're working with trauma informed, you start with the trauma to unpack that trauma and give them the space to express, to share in a safe, non-judgmental space and an understanding way, because the unpacking help them to go toward the healing, even from that depression, because it's not the depression, it's the trauma behind it.
So you used a phrase CBT, that stands for cognitive behavioral therapy, I think.
Yes.
Right. So Shabnam, you are leading a project called Dil Bal Dil. Tell us what that is.
Thank you, Sister Kathy. So Dil Bal Dil basically is one of those projects basically from Abrar, where we provide Afghan newcomer women with a space to talk, share their experiences, and learn how to cope, thrive, and grow from their experiences. It's also meant to be like a bridge between newcomers within the community to connect and rebuild together. But if you want to get into the scientific jargon of it, it's an early intervention support group for female Afghan newcomers in time to be scaled nationally as for all Afghan families.
Okay, so let's do a little bit of that scientific jargoning. Early intervention. So this means newcomers who have just arrived and you're talking to them to try to stop something that might happen.
So basically, what it stands for is when we come, like I was a newcomer myself at one point. So when we first come into a new country and the trauma that Afghan newcomers are carrying as they're coming in right now, as you're probably aware, it is very, very important to intervene at an early stage of when they're coming into Canada and trying to, assimilate into the society. The first year is very, very important. It's very important to introduce mental health regimes when it comes to newcomer populations, specifically Afghan newcomers in our case, right? Because if we find and this comes from lived experience as well, if we don't intervene in the first year, most of the populations coming in, they're stuck in what we would call survival mode. And once they're stuck in that survival mode, which they're already kind of started off before even coming into Canada, they're not going to be able to focus on their mental health. They're not going to be able to focus on sort of a healing journey and a healthy environment of trying to assimilate into the new society. They're already bringing in a lot of migration trauma, a lot of different other types of trauma as they're coming into the country. And we want to make sure that we want to intervene at a time when they're still here, they're fresh, and they haven't yet gone into that little, as we would say, grind. per se. We want them to focus on being healthy, and we don't want them to be driven by their trauma and driven by their survival instincts at all times, which, as you
I'll
all know,
come
is
back
very
to you.
unhealthy.
I'll come back to you in a minute to ask you some more details, but I just want to throw another question over to Abrar. I mean, Canada's accepting refugees from a lot of war-torn countries. Unfortunately, the world seems to be in flames these days. So, Syria, Afghanistan, Rohingya, Ukraine. Does trauma look the same for all of these people, or are there sort of cultural specificities that you try to deal with?
Thank you so much for your question. That's why we also use the cultural competency or cultural sensitivity term when we work, because yes, trauma, like there is absolutely comma science, comma terminology like at that trauma, because majority of them, they witness violence, they witness war coming from these countries, yet there is absolutely the culture pieces that the fear trauma from a culture to another culture. And that's why now our focus are on Middle East and Afghan communities, but we're planning to expand to other cultures and other population, including the Ukrainian and Chinese probably first, next. So it's absolutely the cultural competency. It's important element to be there when you're working.
Okay, so then Shabnam, let's ask you about the cultural competency. I mean, I think you mentioned that you're from Afghanistan. My understanding of Afghanistan, a lot of the people in the community think that mental health is, well, they don't really even know what it is, and you're just supposed to read Quran more or something. And how are you approaching the people to get them involved in your group, and how are they responding?
That's a great question, Kathy. Thank you so much for asking. Basically, you're very much correct. There's a huge gap in mental health when it comes to the Afghan community. The sheer mention of mental health already kind of insinuates to the population that something's wrong with you, or as a Muslim that maybe your deen is not strong enough, or you just need to go pray to kind of heal whatever's going on, because nothing's actually wrong with you, as they would say, and or you're insane. It kind of, we're children of extremes per se, with all the trauma that we're carrying as a population. So what we decided is to look for basically areas within Canada, starting with where we are currently holding our session in Kitchener-Waterloo, where there's a large population of Afghan newcomers, and many of them being women, families, children. And we try to get in touch with most of these populations through different avenues, through our partners, through our connections within the area itself, doing a lot of research, to be honest, because it was very hard to kind of get in touch with the newcomers. But the main criteria was to try to get people who've been here maybe a year, 2 years, a maximum of 5 years, just to kind of set a parameter to it. And basically what we found from all the participants we were able to get in, we have participants between like 15 to 65 years old. That's a huge gap. But it's something that we have learned to work with throughout this program, and we found a way to kind of work through that regardless of the age gap. And we found a great response from all the participants, to be honest. We're almost done our program, mashallah, and we found such a great transformation from the beginning till now. And our participants seem a lot healthier. They're a lot more prone to share their ideas. One of the greatest feedbacks we're getting is that we feel heard. We feel heard. And that is so important, because when they're coming into a new society, especially as women, and especially as Afghan women, as you're already probably aware of the situation back in Afghanistan, they need to be heard, and they need to know that there's hope, that when they come here, they can move forward.
The program has been more than one. Just tell us quickly. We're almost out of time, but you've had.
So the program is just this one time. We just piloted the program, and we just finished our first 8 sessions, and we are going to be following up with future programs in 2023.
And the brochure mentioned art-based therapy. Is that what you've been working with these women?
So we've incorporated it within our program, and we are also, our final session, which is going to be this week, is going to be facilitated by an art therapist, and it's going to be all about art therapy. And we found other participants, especially with the age gap, they respond the best to art therapy.
So Abrar, you're hoping to expand this program. I gather this is just a pilot. What's the next step?
The next step is to scale it nationally. So in each city and each province, that will depend absolutely about like on our funders, which we're grateful for their generosity, the Mental Health Commission of Canada, and Future Ready Initiative.
Well, we commend you for your work, and we wish you well. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for watching. If you like what we do, please share, like, and subscribe. Stay safe, and God bless.